All right, good morning. It's the Harlem Emergency Network weekly update. Bob Ponce, Carol Johnson, and this morning, Wally Abdul Noor is joining us here in the broadcast. How are you this morning, everybody?
I'm
I'm fine.
great.
Okay, you had to think about it, huh?
I
Lot.
was giving Wale privileges to go first.
Okay, so
All
Wally, how
right.
you doing this morning?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm glad to be here.
Great, good to have you here. Yeah.
Hey, I'm glad to be anywhere today.
Mm-hmm. It is a
I,
crazy world. So let's talk a little bit about the current status of COVID in New York and the world. A lot of things going on. So let's start with the world. I want to start talking about Spain, who is evidently it wasn't good enough for the U.S. to have the biggest outbreak. So Spain is trying to catch up, and evidently the story is that with Spain they had there's a lot of similarities right now in Spain to Florida in that they try to open up the economy too early and they didn't have a national plan on how to deal with things, and so all of a sudden their numbers are spiking again. And this just shows that when people ignore common sense, the same thing happens.
Yeah, it's getting a little scary all over again
Hmm.
because now we're actually seeing the change in the virus. We already knew that it took on many different faces, and it was attacking populations that first said, we're safe.
Hmm.
Now we're reading that in China, there's someone who was reinfected.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things. This person actually had COVID, beat it, and 4 months later they're being treated for COVID again, not just testing positive, but actually being treated for COVID the second time.
Hmm.
So, these are the things that we need to be looking at
Right.
because we're not exempt from them just because we're over here. I mean, look how it hit us as opposed to the way it started in Europe, in China,
Hmm.
you know. So we really, really need to pay attention to the national news as well as the international news.
Hmm. And we're learning more about immunity, and how it's not necessarily a given thing that people who've had it that immunity will last. We're still learning about it, just like we're still learning about the other aspects. When this first started, we were caught up in just focusing on the respiratory issues, but now we see that there are heart issues, there are a whole bunch of other symptoms that come up that you know we're just now getting the information out of, and we have to be mindful. And in particular, the issue about young people contracting the disease. I think in the first 2 months, people thought that young people were impervious to it, and now we're seeing that young people do get COVID, and in particular, we've been talking the last couple of weeks about just the whole rush to go back to school and how it seems like people were not they were going back too quickly. Now, what we're seeing is that a number of these universities that opened up their doors this month are already showing lots of signs of COVID. University of Alabama, in particular, 531 cases. University of, I think, Urbana, Illinois, showing cases. And the New York Times is reporting that over 730 colleges and universities are showing at least one case of COVID. Um, So these are things that make us have to look and pay attention to what's going on.
I have a question. Uh, the COVID changes. So this vaccines that they are coming up with, will they be able? Will the vaccine be able to keep up with the changes? Will they affect the changes in the COVID?
Well, that's the question of the day, and I'm glad you're asking it. I'm glad we're asking it because no one seems to be talking about that. They act like it's just so easy. We're just going to come up with this vaccine, but how do you come up with a vaccine for a virus that mutates? When all the data you have to try to create the vaccine is on the virus before it mutated. So if it mutates and you don't know how it's going to mutate, how can you have an effective vaccine solution? And so these are some real questions that we have to answer on these things.
But the vaccine that they're working on is not really what you would call a cure-all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is also supposed to be to slow the reproduction of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. It's not a cure. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different thoughts out there about how they may be able to attack this. And it seems like in other countries, they have a better line on how to possibly find a viable vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
We just seem to be destined to stay behind the eight ball.
Well, the other thing we have to also look at is the vaccine. Where people act like the vaccine is the only treatment possible, but we still um, keep getting information about treatments which might not be an overall cure, but there have been treatments that have been effective that don't get attention from the press. Obviously, we talked about just nutrition and boosting your immune system, and now it's very, very interesting that we started talking back in March about vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc and boosting your immune system. This week, I think it was AARP came out with a whole article on vitamin D, and I'm like, this is pretty much what we were talking about in March. So I'm glad that other people are catching up to us, but it still hasn't been something that the mass media has really addressed. And as we go into the winter and with our concerns about reinfection, I think that this is something that we have to bring this back up again. There are also been some other information we've gotten about other solutions in other parts of parts of the world that's been working that don't seem to get any attention at all. So as we go into the fall, I think it's we have to have a larger conversation about these things. Um, Now, getting back to the school issue, we always have to talk about Florida because there's also always something crazy coming out of Florida. But the news today out of Florida is actually one of common sense that a Florida judge actually struck down the state order requiring all the Florida school districts to open up or lose their funding, which is obviously ridiculous. And so a judge just struck that down and basically called it out for what it is, which is let's see what the state's order required that if the schools didn't get go back by August 31st, they would lose all their state funding with the exception of Miami-Dade and Palm Beach. And the judge said these districts have no meaningful alternative. If a individual school district chooses safety, that is delaying the start of schools until it individually determines it's safe to do so, it risks losing its state funding, even though every single student is still being taught. And so it's good to find out there are still some judges that have some common sense. And, we still want to keep an eye on what's going on here in New York, and whether, what we're doing is common sense. Um, as you know, we are going back with some sort of a hybrid where it's a combination of in person and online, but it seems a little bit unclear as how they're going to execute it. And then now they are looking to use outdoor space and put tents in some of the schoolyards so that they can use the outdoor space to create more social distance. Um, but of course, they just approved this like this week, which means they have like a week to figure out how to get these tents into the schools. So it seems like it just seems like our Department of Education and our mayor have not quite pulled things together yet for the school opening here in New York.
Well, they're pushing it open.
Uh,
Go ahead, Wally.
I was just thinking they are talking about doing classes in parks and putting up tents, and will be very costly. And this is not New York City, is not Florida, and so therefore, when you put up a tent, which might cost thousands of dollars, or tens of thousands of dollars, and for all of these different schools, you're talking millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. It's only going to last. You start school September 10th, and October 15th, it starts getting cold. So you can't even get a month worth of classes in these tents and outdoors. So to me, that kind of money should be put into making sure that the children can get online and have all of the different types of uh, what would I say, up to date uh, means of educating. Then I know a kid that has to do his homework on his phone. That's ridiculous, and he's
Hmm.
failing because he has to do it on his phone, and he gets frustrated, just trying to manipulate the phone. So why would you spend all that kind of money on something that's only going to last a month out of the whole school year?
Yeah, so we have to.
Think about it. I'm sorry. Well, when
No,
you
go
think about
go
it,
ahead.
the spaces, first of all, um, where are these kids going to go? Because I know in most black and brown areas, what's missing are parks.
Yeah.
The other thing is, how big are these tents going to be? And that would still be an indoor flap with an indoor temp with some type of flaps because we're still in hurricane season. So now, if the weather gets bad, we're expecting two hurricanes that's coming down the pike now. We've had a few that haven't actually touched down as badly as they thought it would, but it did a lot of damage. So when you're talking about putting kids in tents, how big are these tents supposed to be? Where these spaces going to be? It's still going to be a closed in space. It has
Hmm.
to be closed in. You can't just put a covering over children without some type of closures.
Hmm.
So when you think about the size opposed to the amount of children that can be in a tent, how many tents are we talking? And what are
Well,
they
that's
going to
why
do? Line them up in the streets like they did these little sidewalk restaurants?
this is why I'm saying that just you figure a school by itself, one school by itself has hundreds of children in it, and plus the administration. I mean, this is something that you would set up for like I wouldn't say permanent, but something that's going to last. Let's say if it could be done for the whole season, even if they had the right kind of tents, because they could put up something with the sides open, or at least two sides open or something like that. But if it could be up for like like I said, if it was Florida or something like that, I could see where the weather doesn't change except for hurricanes. And like you said, now you put up the tent, you only got a month, and then two hurricanes come within that time. You can't take down a tent in 10 minutes. You need a whole day or 2 days to take it down. Then you need another 2 days to put it back up. This is ridiculous. You know,
It's
so
crazy.
to me, it would make more sense to like we the world is moving forward with online uh, uh, training and business to upgrade the school system to be able to deal with it that way and provide the youth with what it takes to be able to learn that way. They could have more people coming out to the kids, and just better equipment. And like I said, I know a kid this personal that is failing because he has to do his work on the phone, on his phone. So
So, there's another story in the news today about shocker, how scientists are calling out our federal government for basically fudging the numbers on an announcement. So, on a news conference on Sunday, President Trump announced the emergency authorization of the use of blood plasma for treatment of COVID-19 patients. And they made up this statistic or highlighted this statistic that the treatment reduced COVID-19 deaths by 35%. But all the scientists and experts who actually worked on it saying that they took one piece of a subset of a study to come out with this number, and it's not the number. And none of the official information said anything about 35% cure rate. And so Dr. Waleed Jalad, who leads the Center for Pharmaceutical Policy and Prescribing at the University of Pittsburgh, he said, for the first time ever, I feel like official people in communications and people at the FDA grossly misrepresented data about a therapy. And so, once again, we see that this administration is politicizing and trying to put a spin on their response and make it sound like they have things under control, when what it seems like they're doing is just grasping at whatever, any information about anybody doing something that has any promise. They're going to take it and spin it and make it sound like they've solved it. And indeed, my understanding from the reports of the Republican convention is that the president made it sound like, again, the Democrats just made up COVID to help him, lose the election, and that right after November, we're going to, no longer have to quarantine or wear masks or something like that. And so we just have to contend with the fact that we have a federal government that has no leadership on this. And we have to stay engaged with our state and local governments, because they've made their mistakes along the way, and that's where we have the most exposure to this.
Well, I mean, considering the fact that you either fired, shut down, muzzled all of your medical experts, and to have anything come from the most irresponsible leadership, and I use that word very lightly, that the U.S. has ever seen. If that's not beyond frightening, then I don't know what is. This
Hmm.
guy is forever coming up with some type of cure or something that can uh, change the economy and how it'll work, and you know kids are not exposed to it. I mean, there's always more and more irrationality coming out of this place. It's obvious the guy's psychotic. it's obvious that he has a form of a mental illness. And the saddest part is that too many of the governing people in these states are paying attention, and people are going to start dying again. So to take anything from this person that has absolutely no medical background or expertise, not look at the fact that he's going to say anything he can possibly say to get back into this office, which has been actually vacant since President Obama left. Let's be clear. That office has been vacant.
Mm-hmm.
And to get back in there to see, keep focusing on the deaths, focus on the amount of people, over 5 million people that we know are infected with COVID. If
Mm-hmm.
you believe anything from this administration, you've got to be crazier than he is.
Well, I mean, the fact that we're still losing like 1,000, 1,200 people a day. We're not talking about 1,000, 1,200 a day being infected. We're talking about 1,000, 1,200 people a day dying still.
Yeah.
As we're passing the 180,000 dead mark and still going strong. And somebody said it's like having two airplane crashes every day consecutively for like a month. If this had happened in any other scenario, we'd be up in arms, but we have an administration that's actually trying to spin this and saying that they did a good job. And that's just incredible. And then we also are facing with the economic results of the pandemic, and so the federal measure protecting 12 million tenants from eviction ends, and so now we have a situation where we have many people who are now in a situation where there are going to be court battles, and we could be seeing mass evictions, throughout this country. And so we're obviously very concerned with that, not only nationwide, but especially here in New York City. And so we will be focusing more on this issue as well as the school issue in the coming weeks, and how are our elected officials responding? What type of protections in place do we have so that we do not see, masses of people, losing their homes right now? And also, it creates another level of instability going into the election. Very hard to vote if you get evicted. Um, and so we really have to keep an eye on all of these things.
You know, the saddest part is that throughout this pandemic, it seemed like one of the most difficult things to do was to find housing for people that needed to be quarantined.
Hmm.
And that is the reason why Harlem Emergency Network, East Harlem Co-Ed, we were the first groups um, actually putting out information on how to quarantine at home with someone who has the infection, how to stay safe. Now, hotel rooms were open for people. Obviously, they weren't for some people, because now, I think it was last month, was the first time that I actually heard the city come out and say, oh, remember, there are hotels for you to quarantine to. But look at all of these people that were already getting infected, family units, um, multiple family units living in one dwelling, and these people had no place to go. So now, and also remember the medical workers, all the medical personnel, they had to find places for them to stay so that they wouldn't go home and take the infection to their families. You couldn't find places for thousands of people. And now tens of thousands of people are not going to be allowed to stay in their homes. It's just that simple. When they go to court, judges are going to be ruling, well, you didn't take care of your business, you have to get out. Get out and go where? And we're not talking about one person from a family unit being quarantined, finding a small hotel room with a bath and a tub is one thing. But what are you going to do when you have families that are going to be evicted? It's going to be right back to that same thing that they were doing with this hotel system for people on social services. Rather than try to find them a home and pay the rent, they'll pay $4,000 for a rat hole hotel room on a rat hole building, no cooking utensils, no refrigeration units. So people were just eating junk. What are you supposed to do with a system that couldn't handle it before a pandemic?
Well, one of the things also we see whenever there's a system like this, if we look behind the curtain, there's usually somebody cashing a check out of it. And we know that was the case with these, as you said, those hotel situations where people were basically getting, thousands of dollars a night to put people up in substandard housing situations. So it's the equivalent of paying five-star money for a hotel and giving them basically a flea-bitten room, and that's literally what people were getting, and what was being paid for out of our tax dollar and what was going into someone's pocket. So we have to be on guard for these things, and it's why some of the recent information about our mayor, and there was a contractor who was a big donor to the mayor, who ended up getting $100 million plus contract for COVID-19 supplies and PPE, even though this person or his business had no experience doing this before. And so that makes me feel like that looks a lot like what happens in the Trump administration, where friends and family seem to get this access on a business level that no one else seems to get. And we know that the mayor's wife, Charlene, is leading up some sort of COVID-19 task force with 14 people staff and $2 million budget. And she seems to be a nice woman, but we did not elect her. And I want to understand, you know, having the mayor's wife do this type of thing, it seems a lot like Trump as well. And so I think we need more answers on these types of things. And it's we're in a democratic city, in a democratic state. That doesn't mean that you get to do the things that the Republicans do. We're supposed to be doing things by the book and not off the books. So we need to have a conversation about this. Now, let's talk a little bit about some things we have upcoming for Harlem Emergency Network. We have Wally Abdul Noor with us tonight, and one of the things we have been in the forefront of training for emergencies, and 2020 got a chance to show just how important all the things we do. Wally, I understand you are doing an emergency smartphone training this evening, and maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what that training entails.
That training entails um, utilizing a person's smartphone as a walkie-talkie. And a person would say, well, why would I need to use the smartphone as a walkie-talkie versus just making a phone call? Um, Number one, in I think it was Australia, uh, all of the communications had gone down except for this type of system on people's smartphones. So it is a viable emergency means of communication. We have a two-way radio network that it's similar to uh, the old telephone system where you had an operator that connected you to who you wanted to talk to. And the reason for this is that everyone can talk at the same time. And if everyone talks at the same time, nothing will be understood. So, in order to have order on the network, you need to have a network operator. So, in other words, in order for this to take place, people have to learn how to operate a two-way radio network. And it's a lot different than, a lot of companies have that. But in an emergency, the stress level and the amount of information that's passed back and forth is far above what a normal company with a two-way radio system has. So people have to be actually trained on being able to use a system like this because, for example, your cell phones uh, companies only have enough equipment for about 30% of the customers. So if 30% of the customers are utilizing the network during an emergency, which about 90% of the people would be using the phone, nobody's going to get through. So yeah, I guess even the smartphone might probably be affected also. However, the point that we are training on the smartphone is to give people an opportunity to learn how to talk on a two-way radio and then e- upgrade them to the actual radio. And these radios can possibly be the only means of communications at uh, at a in a disaster. So our training this evening will encompass uh, learning what the system is and how to operate on it. And those that saw the uh, statement on yes can join the class.
Right. So if you're interested in joining us, you can send us an email to Harlem Emergency Network at gmail.com. We will send you back the information. This training will be available on Zoom and it is free. It is free. This is a powerful resource that you can get and you don't have to pay any money for it. I would recommend that you take some time to do this. And next month is National Emergency Preparedness Month. We are preparing some virtual events, and we will get back to you in the coming days and week with more specifics about it. But we have a lot to talk about. Um, you know, um, Going into this, I believe we were probably one of the earliest community organizations. We started talking about COVID in February when it was still not on everybody's radar, and we were up and running in March, giving people advice on protocols and nutrition. And we've been doing these weekly updates throughout this pandemic, and we'll continue to do so. Unfortunately, there's still a need for it. But this is what we do. This is why we formed this organization to help this community prepare ourselves. And we want people to uh, really get into a mindset going into September of understanding that we still have a potential for a reinfection and reoccurrence here in New York. And now is the time to prepare yourself so that if there's another shutdown, if you're being challenged, um, you know, we've got more resources. We know a lot more now than we did going into it in February and March. But if we don't take that information and actually use it, then we have nobody to blame for ourselves. It's one thing getting caught by surprise the first time, but it's the second thing knowing what we know, and using common sense. And the thing that we've seen, and this is not just a national issue, but it's a global issue. When you do follow the science and do the protocols, we can flatten the curve. And every time in every place in the world that they try to go early and come back before they're ready, they've had reoccurrences and an upward spike. And so, what we don't want to do is have that happen here, especially in the communities that have been hardest hit by this pandemic.
Yeah, Bob, if I could just go back a moment and ask Wale to speak briefly on um, the lack of communication during Hurricane Maria, and or Sandy, when all communications was lost, and how it was the radios that made the first contacts.
Yes, and especially in Maria, um, there was no civilian contact from Puerto Rico, and some of the first contacts that were made were with amateur radio operators. So now you have an island, an American-owned island that is completely off the communication grid, where people have no contact of their relatives, no contact of not even the information that it would take to make a proper response. And so this is what happens when uh, your your infrastructure goes down. It happened in Katrina. The people in Katrina, when I say people, I'm not talking about the regular citizens, but I'm talking about uh, the officials, the the government had no idea that they could be caught the way they got caught. They had, I mean, it was days before they could even uh, figure out what to do or even how to do it. People were pointing fingers. They point fingers at the mayor. They point fingers. Uh, FEMA had no idea of what to do. So the only way that you can prepare for a an event like that is to try to plan ahead. And even with a plan, that's not the entire answer, because when you make the plan, you don't know exactly what's going to happen from your plan. But at least you have a reference point to work from. And communications in any kind of disaster is key. Uh, I used to work on ships, and my job was communications. And if a ship got in trouble without communications, you were finished. Okay. And that's the same on land. Without communications, there's no coordination, there's no response. People don't even know that you're in trouble or where you're in trouble or how you're in trouble to even give you help. So communications is absolutely necessary in an emergency, even for a fire. Let's not even go to the big disasters. A regular fire, if there's a fire expands, grows exponentially in minutes, and the longer that the communicate it takes the communication to get from the location where the fire is to the fire department, and for the fire department to get to the fire, um, that's all a measure of communications, even coming with the right equipment, you know. So communications is absolutely key in an emergency.
Thank
Very true. Very true. And what you mentioned about time being critical, why communications is so important. I mean, one of the things we've learned in learning about emergency preparedness is in an emergency, time is the most critical resource that you don't have, because just by the nature of the fact that an emergency, everything is speeded up. And I think about things like, we learned about stop the bleed and stopping bleeding, because when somebody has arterial bleeding, if you don't react immediately, they may have 5 minutes before they bleed out. Or in fires, in 2 minutes, a fire can sweep through a house, which is the reason why we have go bags, you know, because when it's time to go, you need to grab the bag and get out of the house, and you don't have time to sit around and debate it. And so these principles we find are across the board when it comes to the reason why you plan in advance is so you don't have to figure out during an emergency what to do, because you don't have time. Think about what happened in March, where all of a sudden on March 15th the governor comes out and says we're shutting everything down. You weren't prepared, and so all of a sudden, um, you know schools are shut down, the subways are shut down, the stores are shut down, you know. And if you don't have food and water in your house, if you don't have resources to take care of yourself, if you don't have your medicines in advance, there's no time and there's no place to get it. And so, um, one of the things we are trying to get people to do is to open your mindset and get out of this mode of thinking that everything is going to be available all the time. We've been spoiled because we have Amazon and Grubhub, and it's like, well, everything, the world can be delivered to my door. All I have to do, I've got an app on my phone, and all I have to do is order it, and boom, everything I need is going to show up right away. That's when everything is working. When everything is not working, nothing shows up. And so, um, all of what we've been talking about as an organization is about, we have to change our mindset and not expect that things are going to be there in emergency. You cannot expect the city, state, um, borough president, your district leader, all those people who work on your behalf are not going to be at your beck and call during an emergency. So you have to be able to rely on yourself, your family, groups of people you're working with, and the more we can prepare in advance, the more that we can get through these tough times.
And the interesting thing is, we've got what 4 and 5 and 6 and 12G. Everything is advancing, and unfortunately, a lot of those systems are not just not going to work in certain situations. One thing I know that we learned, as we all studied in emergency preparedness, is that every emergency has the propensity to morph into something else. Everything changes. And we're looking at that now with COVID, where it started, where it is now, how it's beginning to advance again, how it's changing, how it's not the old people, but it's the young people, not only the young people, but the babies, how the children are considered super breeders, but they don't die at as rapid a pace as adults. But at the same time, they can infect more people than the adults do. So when you look back at these radio systems, one thing I'm reminded of, a lot of us did ham radio, back in the 60s, the 70s. I'm aging you, Bob and Wale. Uh,
Mm.
so I remember in Hidden Colors, the movie Hidden Figures, how they could get the astronaut out of the atmosphere, but they didn't know how to get him back in. And they were doing all of this advanced math. But then Dr. Johnson said, wait a minute, we need to go back to the old math. It's the old math. Those figures is what's going to get him back in safely. And that's what we're talking about. We're going back to old school. We're so busy with all these newfangled things and trying to find TikTok and all these different jib jab and all these things that are out now. But it's old school that works. See, for a lot of us, we were teaching sheltering in place. That's
Hmm.
nothing new for us. When the mayor shut the place down, we already had food, we had water. We were less vulnerable to what was going on outside. We learned how to do that. And so we weren't losing our minds. This is what we do. We learned old school. When you came in your house, you wash your hands. You take off those clothes. You wipe off those items before you put them in the refrigerator and the cabinet. I remember my mother telling me that when I was like 8, 9 years old. We'd go shopping. We said, well, we don't have rats and roaches, but does the store? Do you know what's running around in the store at night? So it's all old school, whether you realize it or not. We're taking it back to the beginning. And that's a lot of those systems is what's going to help you stay safe and healthy today.
I would say that the more sophisticated technology is the first to go because it's so sophisticated and it takes so many circuits and circuitry to operate that so much can go wrong. uh, when you go back, as you go back, especially like in communications and everything, it's less sophisticated. So that means that there's less that can go wrong. And so when you in an emergency situation where things are breaking down, you need to have a system that you can work with to make it work if something goes wrong. Right now, if a laptop goes down, there's no opening and fixing it. Forget it. It just goes out the window. And the even the devices and systems, the systems that are used are so sophisticated that one or two things will knock the whole thing out, and you have a real sophisticated system that doesn't work. So, like you said, going back to the old school, and I tell everybody one of the things that astronauts learn how to do, and people that go into to uh, situations that are very, very dangerous. One of the uh, means of communications that is taught is the Morse code. That's the most simplest electronic means of communication, and that is can be done with a light. It could be done very simply, just tapping on something can you can pass the word, and that goes back to the talking drum. So just backing up in time uh, will make you much safer, even though it seems like you need to be more advanced. You know.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think we've come to the end of this broadcast. Thank you all for listening, whether you're listening live or listening to the recording. We are always here on Wednesday mornings at 9:30. We will be particularly active starting next week in the month of September, talking about preparedness and safety, which is what we've been talking about. But now I think people might be listening a little bit closer. Um, People who came to our events last year, people who've been following the Go Bag trainings that East Harlem COAD has done. They had N95 masks in their Go Bag way before the pandemic hit. They didn't have to run out in the store and try to get one or go out into the pandemic without a mask, because as you guys recall, in the beginning of the mask, there was an immediate shortage and regular people couldn't get the masks. And so they were telling us, oh, you don't need the mask. No, we needed the mask from day one. And our Harlem Emergency Network members, Mark McPhee, who I know is watching this morning, I recall him in, I believe it was late February, going to a family event, and he had a mask, and his family looked like he had landed from outer space. And then 2 weeks later, his family was thanking him for sounding the alarm and letting them know what they needed to do to protect themselves. So we will continue to share information on how you can prepare and protect yourself and your family. So please spread the word on what we're doing, and join us here live on Facebook and YouTube next week at 9:30 a.m.
And for those people that attended a session, the governor's citizens preparedness program, and they were given a go bag, and they've been in your closets collecting dust, you need to dig those bags out. I know people that's gone to 10 different presentations and don't realize if you've got one of those bags, you've got an N95 mask in there, and possibly two. So you need to take those bags out. Anybody that got those bags, you need to start pulling them out. There's information there that's going to help you get through this time here. Wale, we want to thank you so much for coming on. Wale is Harlem Emergency Network's Chief Communication and Technical Officer. And
Yep.
so
Thank you for having me.
we pay attention.
Absolutely.
We're not students, but we pay attention.
So before we go, I want to remind people we are doing this emergency radio smartphone training this evening at 7:30. If you're interested, please drop us an email, Harlem Emergency Network at gmail.com, and we'll send you information on how you participate. This is a free training. It's in-depth information that could help save your life. So if you got something else more important than that, I don't know what it is. So see you next week, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.